Hello, my name is Chris Verdusco, and today I will be talking about the United Farm Workers movement during the Civil War era, along with inspirational leaders like Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta. They led protests to fight for farm workers' rights and better working conditions, especially for Mexican American and Filipino American farm workers in the Southwest. I'll talk about their origins, their contributions to the civil rights of labor workers, the culture they established, and their overall significance. I felt like choosing this topic because I felt like it connected more with my heritage, and I was originally going to choose MLK on the March on Washington, but I felt like it would be best if I knew more about this information, considering it has to do with some of my family's history. The legacy of the United Farm Workers, Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta, and its leaders. What caused the movement? Conditions faced by farm workers in the 1950s, like low wages, poor housing, and no protection, led to the boycotts and protests for fair treatment. The movement was vital to the civil rights era, securing labor contracts, banning abuse, and inspiring national support for dignity and justice for marginalized agricultural workers. The main demographic of these people were mostly Asian American as well as Latin American immigrants who only had recently begun working in the States. These people primarily worked in fruit and vegetable fields, especially in California's Central Valley and the southeast and southeastern farms. The warm climate allowed for good farm seasons, but a lot of labor. Exploitation of cheap labor from landowners fueled most of the calls for reform. Why was it important? The civil rights movement for workers in farming labor was important because it led to the exponential growth of farm labor protection and national recognition. The movement led to the expansion of much legislation in order to protect their basic human rights for safe and humane working conditions. Here's an image of two elderly Filipino men protesting during the Delano grape strike. I chose this photo because it reminded me when I saw it that people of all ages and all ethnicities were affected by these poor conditions, which fueled the civil rights demonstrations. We know this because we see three elderly men there who are protesting at the strike. We see one holding his sign with the strike and the other one holding up a poster. In the bottom, we see the two popular leaders which started the Delano grape strike. Who was involved? Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta co-founded the United Farm Workers. Cesar Chavez came from humble beginnings and moved to the U.S. to work as a farm worker at a young age. He witnessed firsthand some of the hardships Latinos had to face, with his father being taken advantage of in a scam that lost him his family terreno, and growing up with segregated facilities for Latinos. Dolores Huerta came from a similar cycle of poverty and had to work her way up to get a college education. She had a teaching degree before and was a teacher, but then became activist with Cesar. They both were CSO organizers, and then they later co-founded the United Farm Workers. There are among other famous leaders like Larry Itlong, who was a Filipino American labor organizer and civil rights activist, who also helped found the UFW.
Dolores Huerta grew up in California's Central Valley, but despite the abundance surrounding them, the migrant farm workers had little to feed their children. Dolores was a teacher, and when she saw her students with empty stomachs and bare feet, she decided to fight for these families. So Dolores began to organize the farm workers, demanding better working conditions and higher wages. Then, she co-founded the United Farm Workers with Cesar Chavez and helped build the Chicano civil rights movement. She changed the world to give working people a voice. You need to know Dolores Huerta.
Some famous strikes were the March to Sacramento in 1966, a 340-mile march to raise awareness and pressure California lawmakers, and the Delano grape strike in 1965 to 1970. Filipino and Mexican American farm workers refused to harvest grapes to demand better pay and conditions. This was during the Civil Rights era, which spanned from 1950s to the late 1960s. Some of the outcomes of these two famous strikes were that the UFW secured its first labor contract with Slaney Industries, a major grape grower, and the union contracts in 1970, which guaranteed better pay, rest periods, and pesticide protections, but most importantly, it rallied national attention for the cause and was one of the first farm worker strikes. Its legacy and contributions. It was a union that inspired change, resilience, and activism. It left behind a legacy of integrity for Latino and Filipino community, and it was the nation's first enduring and largest farm workers union. The most important success being the passing of the California Agriculture and Labor Relations Act of 1975. The CALRA was introduced to the California legislature in April 1975 and passed 2 months later. It guaranteed the right to unionization and secret ballot elections, as well as established the California Agricultural Labor Relations Board as one intermediary on conflicts between unions and growers. The civil rights activism for the labor workers was a leading force in a monumental movement that saw the collective resistance of an entire community. It wasn't just Mexican Americans who were protesting, but all underrepresented farm workers and migrants who wanted to see change. Viewing this PSA, you should be aware of the struggles that previous immigrant workers and laborers had to endure. You should be aware that these people fought together to solve the issues and demand change. I hope this video reminds you of the reform needed today, and I want you to speak out for change that you know is needed against things that are wrong, just as these people once did.